Monaco is one of those rare places on Earth that feels almost unreal when you first hear about it or see it on a screen. It is a tiny sovereign city-state located on the French Riviera, surrounded by the deep blue Mediterranean Sea and packed into just over 2 square kilometers of land, yet it holds one of the highest concentrations of wealth in the entire world. From above, it looks like a perfect luxury model city where everything has been carefully designed to look flawless. Clean streets, modern architecture, shining waterfronts, and endless rows of yachts that seem more expensive than entire countries. But what makes Monaco truly fascinating is not what it shows, it is what it hides beneath that perfect surface. There exists a world shaped by silent pressure, invisible comparison, and emotional complexity that almost nobody talks about, because Monaco is not just a place. It is a psychological environment where reality and illusion live side by side in a carefully maintained balance. Everything in Monaco is curated to perfection. The streets are spotless, the buildings are maintained like luxury showpieces, and even the atmosphere feels controlled, as if chaos has been completely filtered out of existence. There is no visible poverty, no random disorder, and no typical urban struggle that you would expect in any major city. Instead, there is only order, elegance, and silence. But over time, that silence begins to feel different. Not peaceful, but heavy, because when everything is perfect, nothing feels surprising anymore. And when nothing feels surprising, the human mind starts to adjust to luxury as a normal condition. And that is where the illusion begins. In Monaco, wealth is not rare. It is the baseline, and that changes human behavior completely. Because in most parts of the world, wealth is something that separates people. But in Monaco, wealth is something that connects people only on the surface. While the real separation happens at the level of visibility and social positioning, who you are matters less than what you represent. Your identity slowly becomes tied to your lifestyle, the brand of your clothing, the type of car you drive, the events you attend, and the people you are seen with all become a silent language that defines your place in society and in this world. Even silence communicates status, because in Monaco, nothing is truly accidental. Even presence is calculated. People quickly learn that appearance is not optional, it is currency. A person can be extremely wealthy, but if they are not socially visible in the right circles, they can still feel invisible, and this creates the first layer of psychological shift that defines life. Here, Monaco does not just change how people live, it changes how they see themselves at first. Everything feels exciting, the luxury, the exclusivity, the sense of being inside a world that most people will never access. But over time, that excitement begins to fade, and something subtle happens. What once felt extraordinary slowly becomes ordinary, and when luxury becomes ordinary, it stops triggering emotional satisfaction. The human brain adapts quickly, and in a place like Monaco, adaptation means emotional numbness disguised as comfort. This is where the illusion of perfection starts to crack, because perfection when lived every day is no longer beautiful, it becomes expected, and expectation is the beginning of pressure. Monaco's beauty is undeniable. The Mediterranean sunsets, the yachts lined up in the harbor like floating palaces, the golden reflections on the water, the architectural harmony of the city. Everything looks like a dream, but dreams are powerful only when they are distant. When you live inside them, they lose their not stop at a certain income level, and identity confusion does not vanish in luxury. Monaco is often described as a billionaire's paradise, but paradise is always a matter of perception for some. It feels like freedom for others. It feels like pressure disguised as success. The more you observe this place, the more you realize that Monaco is not about escape. It is about exposure. It exposes ambition, it exposes insecurity, and it exposes desire in its purest form. And that is where the real story begins. Not in the luxury that is visible, but in the emotions that are carefully hidden behind it. Monaco, the life they don't show you on Instagram. Part 2. Monaco's elite society is not simply a collection of wealthy individuals living in luxury. It is a highly structured invisible system built on perception, influence, and silent hierarchy, where everything looks effortless on the surface but is carefully controlled underneath. When you enter this world, you quickly realize that money alone is not enough to belong here, because in Monaco, wealth is common, but relevance is rare, and relevance is what truly defines social position. People do not openly ask who you are in the traditional sense. Instead, they silently measure you through your connections, your lifestyle, your visibility, and your ability to exist within the right environments without trying too hard to prove it. The elite society in Monaco operates like an unspoken network where every interaction carries hidden meaning. A dinner invitation is never just a social gesture, it is a signal. A yacht party is never just entertainment. It is positioning, and even casual conversations often carry layers of evaluation beneath polite smiles and calm voices. There is always a silent question being answered: who has access to whom, and what level of influence do they represent? Billionaire psychology in this environment evolves in a very unique way, because once financial survival is no longer a concern, the human mind does not become peaceful, it becomes restless in a different direction. The question shifts from how do I survive to how do I stay relevant, how do I maintain influence, how do I continue to exist in spaces where everyone is already powerful in their own way. This creates a constant psychological pressure that is invisible from the outside but very real from within. Monaco is filled with people who have already achieved what most of the world considers success. But success here does not bring closure. It removes one level of struggle only to replace it with another more subtle one. And this is where hidden stress begins to grow quietly in the background of luxury life in Monaco. There is a constant need to maintain an image, not in a loud or obvious way, but in a highly refined, controlled manner. People are extremely aware of how they are perceived, not because they are insecure in a traditional sense, but because perception itself is a form of capital in this society. A single event, a single connection, or even a single absence from the right place can subtly shift how someone is viewed in elite circles. And this awareness creates a continuous mental load that never fully switches off. Social hierarchy in Monaco is not written anywhere, but it is deeply understood by everyone who
lives there at the top are ultra-high net worth families, old money networks, and globally influential figures whose names often carry weight beyond financial value. Beneath them are new wealth individuals who may have significant resources but are still navigating access and acceptance. And then there are those who exist in between, constantly moving through different levels, trying to find stability in a world that does not offer fixed positions. What makes this hierarchy even more complex is that it is not static. It shifts constantly depending on events, locations, associations, and even trends. Someone who is central in one circle can be peripheral in another, and this fluidity creates an environment where stability is psychological rather than social. Invisible rules govern almost every aspect of life in Monaco. Even though they are never officially stated, you do not need to be told how to behave because you learn it by observation and repetition. You learn which places are considered exclusive. You learn how much visibility is appropriate and how much is excessive. You learn that showing too much effort can sometimes reduce your status, and that silence can sometimes communicate more power than speech. Billionaire psychology in this setting is deeply influenced by repetition of exposure to luxury, because when luxury becomes normal, the brain starts seeking meaning in other forms of stimulation, influence, legacy, exclusivity, and control. Begin to replace material desire, but even these new goals do not eliminate internal pressure, they simply redefine it. There is also a hidden emotional cost that rarely gets discussed openly. Many individuals in this environment experience a form of isolation that is not caused by lack of people, but by lack of depth. Relationships often exist within boundaries of status and mutual benefit, which means emotional authenticity becomes rare over time. This creates a subtle disconnect where individuals are constantly surrounded by others but rarely truly understood. Monaco looks like a place of celebration, but beneath that celebration there is a continuous effort to maintain equilibrium between identity and expectation, between personal truth and public perception, and between wealth and emotional grounding. This tension is not always visible, but it is always present, shaping behavior, decisions, and even silence. And that is the reality of Monaco's elite world, a world where everything is seen but not everything is understood. Monaco, the life they don't show you on Instagram. Part 3 in Monaco. The billionaire lifestyle is often imagined as the ultimate version of human success, a life without limits, without struggle, and without unanswered desires. But the reality inside that world carries a very different emotional texture, because when every external problem is solved, the internal world becomes louder and more difficult to ignore. At first, it feels like freedom, unlimited access to luxury private jets, luxury villas, yachts worth millions, designer fashion, and invitations to places most people only see online. But over time, this abundance stops feeling like excitement and starts feeling like repetition. And repetition slowly turns into emotional silence, a silence that is not peaceful but heavy. Because when everything is available, nothing feels special anymore. And when nothing feels special, the human mind begins to search for meaning in places that wealth cannot reach. There are stories in places like Monaco that are never officially told but quietly understood by those who live there. One such story is of a man who built a global financial empire, someone who could buy anything without hesitation. He lived in a penthouse overlooking the Mediterranean. Every morning began with sunlight reflecting off the sea, and every night ended with city lights glowing like a painting from the outside. His life looked perfect, but those who knew him closely understood a different reality. He rarely hosted people. Not because he was antisocial, but because gatherings felt empty to him over time. He stopped feeling excitement even during moments of success. Achievements that once brought joy became emotionally flat. He would sit alone in silence, surrounded by luxury that most people would dream of, and still feel a strange absence that he could not explain. It was not sadness in the traditional sense, it was emotional numbness. Another story often whispered in elite circles is of a young woman born into extreme wealth whose life was publicly presented as flawless. Social media showed her traveling across the world, attending fashion events, and living a life that looked like a continuous celebration. But behind that curated image, she struggled with a different reality. She often described feeling like her life was already decided for her. Every move, every appearance, every relationship carried expectations that were not always her own. She was surrounded by people constantly, yet felt they valued her presence or her position. This created a quiet internal conflict where she was always visible but rarely truly seen. These are not isolated cases in Monaco. They are reflections of a deeper pattern where emotional emptiness exists. Not because something is missing externally, but because everything external has already been fulfilled when life becomes too comfortable. The brain loses its struggle-based meaning system and begins to question identity itself. Who am I when I no longer need to fight for anything? What defines me when nothing challenges me? This question becomes a silent companion in many lives within this world. The luxury versus loneliness contrast in Monaco is not dramatic. It is subtle and continuous. It does not arrive as a crisis. It develops as a background feeling. For example, sitting in a private terrace overlooking the Mediterranean at sunset is something that looks like a dream from the outside, but for someone who lives it every day, it can become emotionally neutral. The view remains beautiful, but beauty alone stops creating emotional response, because familiarity reduces intensity, and when intensity reduces, silence becomes more noticeable in these moments. Luxury becomes physical comfort, but emotional distance increases, and that distance is where loneliness quietly grows. The paradox is that these individuals are never truly alone in a physical sense. There are assistants, friends, business partners, and social circles constantly around them. But emotional loneliness is not about presence, it is about connection. And connection in elite environments is often filtered through layers of status perception and expectation, which makes it difficult to experience raw, unfiltered understanding. Even in moments of celebration, there is often an undercurrent of emotional detachment. Champagne flows, music plays, laughter exists. But internally, many are observing themselves as if they are part of a performance rather than a lived experience. Monaco amplifies this feeling because everything is visually perfect, which makes internal imbalance harder to explain. The environment does not allow visible struggle. So struggle turns inward, becoming psychological rather than external. And this internalization is what creates the emotional void that many wealthy individuals experience over time. They begin to realize that every desire fulfilled only creates space for another desire, and every achievement only resets the baseline of satisfaction higher than before. This cycle does not end, it evolves. And in that evolution, emotional grounding becomes harder to maintain because nothing external remains unknown enough to generate lasting excitement. And so the human mind turns inward, sometimes in search of meaning, sometimes in search of peace, and sometimes in search of something that feels real in a world that feels increasingly curated and controlled. And this is the hidden truth of the billionaire lifestyle in Monaco. It is not defined by what it has, but by what it slowly removes the need for struggle. The presence of constant luxury and the absence of emotional unpredictability all combine to create a life that is visually extraordinary, but internally complex and often quietly lonely. Monaco, the life they don't show you on Instagram. Part 4. The final truth about Monaco is not hidden in its yachts or casinos or luxury skyline. It is hidden in the gap between what people see and what people feel, because Monaco is not just a physical place. It is a carefully constructed illusion of perfection that exists for the world to admire, while the reality inside it remains far more human and far more complex. When you look at Monaco through Instagram, it feels like a dream world where everything is flawless, every image is curated to perfection. The sea looks more blue, the sunsets look more cinematic, the cars look more expensive, and the people look like they are living a life without struggle. But Instagram is not reality. It is selection. It is a highlight reel of moments that represent success, not the emotional cost behind them. And Monaco, in many ways, is the perfect stage for that illusion because everything already looks like a filtered version of life, even before a camera is involved. But reality inside this world is not built on perfection. It is built on maintenance, constant, invisible maintenance of image, identity, relationships, and relevance. And that maintenance slowly becomes the real lifestyle of the people who live there over time. Many individuals in Monaco begin to understand a quiet truth, that luxury does not remove human complexity. It only hides it behind better scenery. A person can be sitting in a $1 million apartment overlooking the Mediterranean with everything they ever wanted, physically present, and still feel emotionally distant from their own life because the human mind does not respond to luxury the way it responds to meaning, and meaning cannot be purchased or displayed on social media. This is where the philosophical layer becomes clear. It is not a story about wealth. It is a story about perception and how perception can shape emotional reality when everything around you signals success. Your internal world is expected to match that signal even when it does not. And this disconnect creates a silent psychological tension that most people never notice from the outside. But those living inside it feel every day. The illusion of Monaco is not that it is fake. The illusion is that it is complete because what is shown is real, but what is not shown is equally real, and often far more emotionally significant. The laughter at elite events is real, the luxury is real, the beauty is real, but so is the loneliness, the pressure, the comparison, and the quiet identity questioning that happens when the noise fades and the doors close behind closed windows. Many lives in Monaco reflect this duality, a life that looks full from outside but feels fragmented from within. And this is where the deeper message emerges. Happiness is not proportional to visibility. Success is not proportional to peace, and wealth is not proportional to emotional clarity. Monaco strips away the illusion that external achievement automatically creates internal fulfillment. Instead, it reveals something uncomfortable but honest, that the human experience is always internal. No matter how external the world becomes, there is a final philosophical realization that often comes only with time in places like this, and it is that everything external eventually becomes normal, but the internal self never stops searching for something that feels real and grounded, and that search does not end with money or status or environment. It ends only with awareness that presence matters more than perception, and connection matters more than display when you remove the Instagram layer from Monaco. What remains is not emptiness, but humanity. People trying to understand their place in a world that constantly measures them through symbols rather than emotions. People learning that being seen is not the same as being understood, and that being admired is not the same as being known. And that realization is where the story truly ends and begins at the same time, because Monaco is not just about billionaires or luxury or the French Riviera. It is a mirror that reflects a universal truth that in a world obsessed with showing life, We often forget how to actually feel it, and when that realization settles in, the illusion does not disappear, but it changes shape. It becomes a reminder that what we see is only part of the story, and what we live inside is where the real story always was, and that is the final truth. Monaco is not the life they don't show you on Instagram. It is the reason why Instagram can never show life completely. And if you made it this far, the message is simple. Not everything that shines is happiness, and not everything hidden is empty. The real life is not happening in posts or pictures. It is happening in moments that never get uploaded, in conversations that never get recorded, and in feelings that never get filtered. Monaco teaches us that the world can look perfect and still feel incomplete, and maybe the real luxury is not what you can show, but what you can feel when no one is watching.